Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Ches, Daf 108 of Masechta Pesachim. Of course, in the very great parak of erev Pesachim. Now, what does Daf Kuf Ches discuss? So, the very beginning, we continue where we left off yesterday. In terms of eating on erev Pesach, we discussed drinking wine on erev Pesach. We also discussed drinking wine during the seder. We discussed leaning, haseba, that we lean while we eat and drink certain things at the seder. We will discuss that. And the second Amud discusses the measurements, how much wine you need to drink. So, all sorts of interesting sugyas. Let us start on Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Rave Havashasi Chamra Kulimali Yoma de Pischa. So as we know from Masechta Brachis and Daf Lamed Hey, that Rava would drink wine on erev Pesach. Ki heichi denigrori lelibe denecho matzah tvei leorta. The reason why he would drink this wine all day on erev Pesach was so that he should work up an appetite in order to eat matzah that evening. And Rava says, and how can I prove to you that drinking wine builds the appetite? The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, you hear that? Between the first and second, and between the second and third cups of wine at the seder, you could drink more cups if you want. So after Kaddish, after you make Kiddush, the first cup of wine is Kaddish, is the Kiddush that you make at the Seder. The second cup of wine is at the end of Magid. The third is after the meal, benching, and the fourth one is after Hallel. So between Kiddush and the bracha and the kos of after Magid, Kilu, during the whole Seder story, you could drink as much wine as you want. Be careful, because you still have to drink the other 3 cups after. But you're allowed to drink wine at that point, and also during the meal, of course, during Shulchan Orech, you're allowed to drink wine. However, between the third and fourth cups, kilu, after you bench and before Hallel and during Hallel, don't drink any more wine. So you're allowed to drink wine in between cups 1 and 2, and in between cups 2 and 3, but not in between 3 and 4. Now, if wine fills you up, well then, amay yishte, then why would you be allowed to drink between these cups? If you fill up on wine, well then when you drink matzah, no. When you eat matzah, it's going to be achila gasa. Selashmamina megar gar. So, achila gasa meaning too much eating, overeating. We don't want you overeating. So rather it must be that wine, taka, encourages the appetite. And therefore, you're allowed to drink wine during Magid and during Shulchan Orech, because all good. Well, obviously during Shulchan Aruch it's with your meal, but even during Magid you're allowed to drink wine because it's only going to increase your appetite for matzah. Rav Sheshes Havayosef b'Sainisa Kalmale Yoma de Pischa. So Rav Sheshes would fast all day on erev Pesach. Pasha wouldn't eat on erev Pesach. So now the Gemara wants to say Nema Kosav Rav Sheshes. So listen to this. Let's say that Rav Sheshes holds Samuch L'Mincha Gedol Etnan. Okay, so that when our Mishnah at the very beginning of erev Pesachim says that on erev Pesach Samuch L'Mincha we don't eat. So let's assume that Rav Sheshes understands this to be referring to Mincha Gedola, i.e. from noon already you don't eat. And what's the reason? Umishum Pischa Domemimshich ve'asi le'imnuye milemebed Pischa, who that we're concerned that, well, if you eat after noon, so then you might get caught up in your meal and you'll neglect to bring the Korban Pesach. V'savar ki hada amr Rebbe Lazar amr Boshaya. There's a gears that switches it around. that Ben Beseira would, if you slaughtered a korban Pesach already from the very beginning of the day on the 14th of Nisan, from Alos HaShachar, if you were, according to Ben Beseira, if you were to slaughter your korban Pesach, you would be Yotzei. Mitzafres man pischahu techule yom achazi le pischa disaver ben arbaim ben erev de esmo le erev de idna, and that the entire day on erev Pesach you could already slaughter your korban Pesach, because Ben Beseira understands that when the pasuk says beino arbaim, that you slaughter the korban Pesach beino arbaim, it means what's arbaim? What are the two erevs? What are the two evenings? Yesterday evening and this evening. So meaning once, as Rashbam points out, once yesterday evening ends, i.e. from Alos HaShachar on the 14th until the evening at the end of the 14th, Kilu, the evening of the 15th, at the beginning of the 15th. So basically all day on the 14th day of Nisan, you're allowed to slaughter your korban Pesach. So now, to tie it all together, we have Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes fasted all day on erev Pesach. We want to say that what this means is that, well, he must hold that he must understand our Mishnah, that when our Mishnah says that you don't eat in the afternoon on erev Pesach, how come? So we had two options yesterday. I think it was yesterday. One was that, it was yesterday. One option was that it means don't eat already from Mincha Gedola, from 6 hours into the day, because Midoraisa, you can already slaughter your korban Pesach at 6 hours into the day. However, Lemaise, we don't slaughter the korban Pesach until 8.5 hours into the day after we've slaughtered and offered the Tamid Shabbein Arbaim. So therefore, if you say that we don't eat already from 6 hours into the day on erev Pesach, it's because we're concerned that, well, if you start eating already at 6 hours into the day, well, there's already a chiyuv to bring the korban Pesach, but because in practice we don't bring it for another 2.5 hours, if you get caught up in your meal, you might neglect to offer your korban Pesach altogether. The other way to understand it was that you don't eat from 9 hours into the day because we don't want you to eat too close to seder night, because then you won't have an appetite for matzah and it'll be overeating. Fine. So we want to assume that Reb Sheshes would understand our Mishnah at the beginning of the parak to be referring to 6 hours into the day, i.e. that there's a concern that you might get caught up in your eating and you will neglect to bring the korban Pesach. And then we also want to say that he holds like Ben Beseira, that actually Mida Oraisa, the korban Pesach can be offered not only from noon, but actually from the beginning of the day, from the morning. Because he understands Bein Arbaim to mean from yesterday evening till today evening, anywhere in between then you can slaughter the korban Pesach. So if you bring those two together, you get two things. A, that once already there's a chiyuv to bring the korban Pesach Mida Oraisa, we have to be concerned that if you eat a meal, you might get caught up in the meal and you'll neglect to bring the korban Pesach. And number two, that the Zman Shchitas korban Pesach Mida Oraisa already begins from the morning. So if you bring those two together, that's why Rav Sheshes Pasha wouldn't eat the entire day on erev Pesach. Got it? Good. Weiter. Amrilo, to say, as exciting as that explanation was, that's not the reason why. Alright, what can I tell you? Shiny Rav Sheshes the Istin is Hava. Rav Sheshes was unique in that he was very, very particular. He was an Istinis. The Yitoim B'tzafar Midi L'orta Lo Hava Mahani Le Mechla. That he was so sensitive that if he would eat anything in the morning, so then he wouldn't have an appetite in the evening. And he wanted to have an appetite that evening for matzah. So therefore, he wouldn't eat bichlal the entire day. It has nothing to do with fancy cheshbonis about if he holds like Ben Beseira and concerned about missing the korban Pesach. That's not his concern. His concern is simply he knows himself and he has a very sensitive, I don't know what, but eating habits. And if he eats a shtickle in the morning, so then he won't have an appetite in the evening, and therefore he didn't eat the entire day on erev Pesach. Says the Gemara, quoting the Mishnah, even a poor person needs to lean when he eats at the seder like a free man. Says the Gemara, Itmar, it was stated, matzah tzarich haseba, mar ein tzarich haseba. When you eat the matzah, so you lean. When you eat the maror, you do not lean, because matzah is reminds us it reminds us of the redemption. Therefore, since it reminds us of the redemption, we want to be leaning when we eat the matzah. But maror doesn't require a seba because that's about the slavery. Zecher la'avdos reminds us of when we were slaves, and that's not something that you want to lean to. Lean is derech cherus, freedom. So when we eat the matzah, which reminds us of redemption, so we lean. When we eat the maror, which reminds us of being slaves, we don't lean. Okay? Yayin. Now what about the wine? What do you guys think? When you drink the wine at the seder, do you lean? So itma mishmei Rav Nachman tzarich haseba, ve'itma mishmei Rav Nachman ein tzarich haseba. Great. Excuse me. So we have two seemingly conflicting opinions of Rav Nachman. One is that, yes, when you drink wine at the seder, you do have to lean. The other is, no, when you drink wine at the seder, you do not need to lean. V'lo pligi, and the Taka don't argue. Ha-b'tarte kasa kamo'e, ha-b'tarte kasa basra'e. It depends if we're talking about the first two cups or the last two cups. Amr l'lahai gisa, v'amr l'lahai gisa. Now, what about the first two cups and the last two cups? Which halacha applies to which? Amr l'lahai gisa. So you can explain it in the following way. Trei kase kamoi b'hi haseba. That davka, the first two cups of wine are where you have to lean. Because the geula is getting started, it's getting going with the first two cups. We're talking about Magid and the whole story about Egypt. Whereas the last two cups you don't need to lean because, okay, whatever happened, happened. We're not, the experience, the journey is over. During the first two cups, that's when we're going through Geula. We're going through the story, the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. That's when we lean to sort of experience the story that we're describing. But after you're done with Magid, the last two cups on the benching and on the hollow, all right, the Geula is over. Let's go weiter. There are those who explain Rav Nachman in the opposite way, which is Adarabba, Trekase Basroe Bo Aseba Aishaita the Kav Yecherus. That the last two glasses of wine davke you want to lean because that's when you free people. Whereas Trekase Kamoy Lo Bo Aseba Dakati Avodim Ayinu Kamar. You're not going to lean on the first two glasses of wine because we're saying it ourselves in the seder. Avodim Ayinu. We're recognizing that we were slaves. How could we be recognizing that we were slaves and yet be drinking wine, leaning like free people? It only makes sense to be leaning once we've finished Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, and now we can establish ourselves as free people. So now since we can make arguments in this way and that way, so just do a seba for all four of them. Okay, sounds good to me. Praktin lo shmei haseba. You say that if you lie down on your back, that's not considered leaning. Haseba's yomin lo shma haseba. Lying on your right, leaning on your right side is not considered haseba either. The Rashbam gives two options. Either, well, because you need to use your right hand for eating, so how can you be leaning on it if you need to use it? And number two is that the other way to understand it is in the following. V'la'od elo shemiyakim kone leveshet v'yovid dei sakona. The other reason would be that, well, out of concern, that apparently your trachea is on your right side, and therefore if you lean on your right side, well then you might get the food into your trachea, and that could be dangerous. So therefore you lean on your left side. That's it. So you lean on your left side. That's what haseba is. A woman does not need to lean if she's with her husband. Okay? But if she's a very important woman, then she does do haseba. Ben Eitzel Aviv by Haseba. A son by his father does Haseba. Ibailu, they want to know, Talmud Eitzel Rabbo Mai. What about a student next to his teacher, his Rebbe? Does he lean or not? Toshma, coming here, the Amar Abaye, Kiavinun Beimar, says Abaye, when we were by Rabbah in Pumbedisa, Zaginun Abirke Da'adade, all the students would lean on each other's knees. Kilu. Okay, they would lean. Kiasina Levi Rav Yosef Amalon, but when, of course, as we learned in Masech the Brachas at the very end, Rabbah was first the Rosh Hashiva in Pumbedisa and then Rav Yosef. So when we were learning by Rav Yosef, i.e. after Rabbah, when Rav Yosef was the Rosh Hashiva, so he told us, Lo tzrichasu, don't lean, because after all, the fear of your Rebbe is like the fear of the Eibishter, and therefore, don't lean in front of me as your Rebbe. Meisvei, we have a kasha. One second. We have a brayso that says, everybody does Haseba, even a student in front of his Rebbe. So how come Rav Yosef was saying that the students should not lean in front of him? So the Gemara says, Meh, kitanyai b'shulyu din agare. That's talking about the student of a carpenter. Yeah, if you have a carpenter and his student, so then the student can lean in front of him. But if you have a Rebbe and his Talmud, so then Rav Yosef wanted to argue that the students would not lean in front of him. Interesting. Ibailu de asakasha shamish mai. What about if you have a person who's working at the seder? Pashit, he's a waiter, he's serving. When he eats, matzah or drinks wine, does he have to do a seba? So Tashma, Kominir Damar B'Yeshua ben Levi, Hashamish she'achol kazayis matzah kishu meisev yotza. Says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that if you have somebody who's serving at the Suda, at the Seder, and he eats a kazayis of matzah when he's leaning, so he's yotze the mitzvah. Meisevin lo meisev lo. Implying that, when he's leaning, he's yotze the mitzvah, but if this server is not leaning, he's not yotze the mitzvah. Shmamina ba yaseba shmamina. So we see that the servers also need to do aseba. Okay? Very cool stuff. V'amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, it says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Noshim chayavos ba'ba kosas halalu, sha'afin hayu ba'osu anes. That women also are mechuyavos to drink 4 glasses of wine, because they were also involved in the miracle. As the Rashbam points out, the Gemara in Sota says, V'schai noshim tzidkonios, shayu ba'osu ador negalu, that because of the very righteous women in that generation, the Yidden were redeemed from Egypt. I believe it's because after the men were enslaved all day, they would come home tired and they were not interested in having children and sleeping with their wives, and their wives would encourage them to sleep with them and populate and have children. And it was because of this that the Yidden were zoche to multiply and ultimately be fruitful and leave Egypt. Amr Yehuda, Amr Shmuel, says reviewed in the name of Shmuel, says reviewed in the name of Shmuel that these 4 cups of wine that we're talking about, how much wine do you actually have to put in them? So right now we say this sort of undefined amount, which is enough that you'll mix it together with water and make it into a nice glass of wine. Okay, because of course back then it would be some kind of a concentrate that you would mix with water. Shason chayotza. If you drink the wine raw, meaning you didn't mix it with water, it's okay, you're yotze. Shason b'vasa achas yotza. If you drink them all at once, meaning let's say you just line up 4 glasses of wine and just do 1, 2, 3, 4, done. Yotza, itaka works. We'll have to see what that means. Hishkamein levanav levnei beis yotza. And if he made a bracha on the wine and then divided it up and shared it with the people in his house, he's also yotze. So let's see what these things mean. Shason chayotza. When we say that if you drink the wine without diluting it, undiluted, yutaka yotze. So says Rava, technically speaking, you're yotze the wine. If you're all daled kosis, you used undiluted wine, so then sure, you drink wine, but that's not exactly chayrus. It's not exactly freedom, because the freedom would be if you prepared the wine properly. Shason b'vasachas, if you drink all four of them in one go, just one after the other. Rav Omar, yidei yayin yotza, yeah, you might be yotze wine, kilu simchas Yom Tiv, drinking wine on Yom Tiv, but yidei arba kosis lo yotza, you're not yotze the daled kosis of the seder. You're still going to have to drink a cup of wine at its appropriate place. So be careful. Don't drink all 4 cups at once, because then you're going to have to drink even more, and, it's a lot of wine. You got to be careful. You got to know if you can handle all that. And, which, by the way, it's very exciting to drink wine during Magid, but you do have to be able to pace yourself, because it's a lot of wine. So we said that if you make a bracha on the wine and then share it with the other people in your house, so it's okay. However, says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that you still have to drink rov kos, which is interesting, because we said the other day that by kos shel bracha you have to drink melo lugmav, a cheekful. It looks like when it comes to seder night, a cheekful isn't enough. This isn't a kos shel bracha; it's a kos of daled kosis. So here you have to drink rov kos. You have to drink a majority of the cup of wine. So also be careful in terms of how much wine you're putting in that cup. Yeah, I usually use like a small glass when it comes to daled kosis, because I don't like to feel like I have to just be drinking tons of wine. It makes it not as fun. So like this, I use a smaller cup, and then I don't have to drink as much wine, and then I can do like what the Gemara says, to drink wine during Magid and all that kind of stuff, and I don't have to worry about drinking too much. I can be in control of that. Right? Let's go weiter. Meisve. Dalkosis alalu tzarich sheiboin k'dei revius. So these 4 cups of wine, tzarich sheiboin k'dei revius, okay, you have to have a revius in each glass of wine, okay? Echad chai v'echad mozug, whether it's raw, whether it's diluted, echad chodesh v'echad yashon, whether it's new wine, whether it's old wine. And the chiddush with new wine and old wine is that maybe Rashbam wanted to argue that maybe the flavor is maybe undeveloped in the new wine, or maybe it's too weak in the old wine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda tzarich shebo tam umar yain. Rabbi Yehuda says that it has to have the taste of wine, i.e. to the exclusion of the young wine and the old wine, because the flavor is either undeveloped or weakened, assuming that's, often old wine is very, very flavorful, but the assumption here is that the older wine would have a weaker taste. And it also has to look like wine. It has to be red, dafka, as Rashbam says. So you should use red wine, which is interesting. So use red wine at the seder. Katani biyas kedei revius v'at omer kos yofe. That is the kasha. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel at the top of the Amud that when it comes to the seder night, the daled kosis, they have to have enough for a kos yafeh, for a very geshmaka kos. The thing is, we have a brisa over here that's saying, doesn't say anything about a kos yafeh. It says a revius. So which one is it? Amre idividi chad shiruhu. So we say the taka the same inyan. Mai kedei mizigas kos yafeh dika amar. What's mizigas kos yafa? Mizigas kos yafa is taka revius. That's what it means. It means that each glass is going to have a revius of wine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda tzarich sheibo tam umare, says Rabbi Yehuda, it has to have flavor and it has to have appearance. Amarav, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi says, how come Rabbi Yehuda says that? Tichsiv al ter yain ki yisadam. Do not be too intrigued by wine because it's red, i.e. that, or it'll make you red. The point being that wine is associated with red. Alright, sounds good to me. Well, friends, that was Daf Kuf Ches of Masechta Pesachim. I hope you enjoyed it very much. What did we learn on Daf Kuf Ches? Drinking wine on erev Pesach. we see that Rava would drink wine on erev Pesach because it would increase his appetite for matzah. We see that for that reason also you're allowed to drink wine during the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, pre-matzah, because it's going to increase your appetite for the matzah. We lean for matzah, we do not lean for maror. When it comes to daled kosis, there's a distinction between the first two and the last two, but we don't know exactly what that distinction is, so we just lean for all four. You lean on your left side, not while lying on your back and not while lying on your right side. You lean on your left side davka. And then we discussed what is the shear for the daled kosis. The answer is it's a revius of wine, and it's a revius of wine. There was an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that a davka needs to be red and have the flavor of wine, although I don't know that we necessarily paskin that way. I don't know, did it look like we paskin that way? Let's see. I don't know that we necessarily paskin that way, so I don't know that you necessarily need to drink red wine, although another important point there was that Rav Nachman Beitzlik said you have to drink taka rov kos, the majority of the cup, which is interesting. Whereas by a regular kosher bracha, you drink melo lugmov, a cheekful. By the Pesach seder, the daled kosis, you taka drink the majority of the cup. Anyways, Chaver, that was Daf Kuf Ches. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Peace out.